Hi everyone, welcome to PDF's discussion forum on Pakistani Diaspora. My name is Aruj and I'm part of the discussion forum team. To start off every discussion like we've done in the past, I'm just going to briefly go over the rules that we have for our forum. Number one, the forum is governed by the following key principles. Number one, an open discussion where speech is not censored in any form or manner. Number two, no form of discrimination on the basis of gender, religious belief, race, ethnicity, or otherwise. 3, the group will endeavor to provide a safe, non-threatening environment. 4, each participant has an equal right to state their views and challenge one another's. We encourage you to challenge one another's views. 5, statements have to be backed up by evidence if you can, and opinions have to be clearly explained. 6, participants must agree to respect each other's views, whether they agree with them or not. And 7, each discussion forum builds on the last discussions that we have. Our last 2 were on education, and we've had a couple in the past. And again, like I said earlier, we'll be talking about the Pakistani Diaspora. So we're supposed to start off with the video.
So I'm going to just talk.
We're just going to talk about current affairs.
Okay, well, so it's been a quiet week. Nothing really interesting happening in Pakistani news. And the PM is probably going to be tossed out again, which might lead to an interim government by November. That's the rumors floating around nowadays. But, political intrigues are typically boring. So, but one thing of note is that the PTI, the Reconsaf, they released a policy platform a few days ago, which is substantive, more substantive than the policy platform that the other parties have, which is a good step. It means that parties are talking about actual things that they're going to do, as opposed to talking about, random things like anti-Americanism. They're actually talking about, we're going to increase the health budget, or we're going to, do away with a certain ministry, the railway ministry, right? So they have concrete things on the table that they say that they're going to do. And this is a good thing, I think, even though I don't particularly like the PTI, but I think they've done a good job.
There was, in the last 3 weeks, a lot has went by in the news, wasn't it? The Olympics happened.
Yes.
We didn't win hockey.
Yes.
And then it was also Eid, but I heard that on Eid
It was 12th August.
Huh?
It was 14th of August as well, since the last.
14th of August as well. But on Eid there was I heard there was a mask, the killing of the shul.
It's been happening every day.
Yeah,
so it wasn't just Shias.
Right.
There's been lots of attacks against Shias over the last few months.
Yeah.
And they've been ongoing, there might have been another attack the day before Eid, but it's almost happening every day, right? So it's actually, not every day, but once a week you hear of one attack, right?
No, I'm just looking back, I'm thinking just because it's Eid doesn't make it different, because it has to happen. So more often there should be, there just making an exception.
I guess it is more awful than it should. But I mean, it's good that you bring it up. I think this has sparked a bit of a debate amongst some leaders about how there has been a debate over the last few weeks about how you treat minorities.
Yeah.
There's been the blasphemy case where an 11-year-old girl is in jail, and the president says that he doesn't stand for it, but she is where she is.
They said it's for her protection because
yeah, that's actually what happened, and that's actually true to an extent. They often put people who are accused of blasphemy in. I was actually listening to a talk show about this last night. So what happened in this case was that she was walking with some papers, right, and apparently they were disrespectful, right. So one of the imams, he got onto the loudspeaker and he told the entire neighborhood that this girl is. So if you rouse sentiment and you make it seem worse than it is, people will get angry, right? So in order to protect them, the police often actually will just put them in jail right away. And it's true, actually, to protect them, they will do that often. Not that it always helps, because the law itself is so messed up. But it's better than them getting lynched, right? So it's a choice between the worst of two worlds, and
was the girl religious minority, or is she Muslim?
She's a Christian. Her name is Rimsha, and one of the issues, complications there, and a lot like people just don't even know, right? The thing is, and like I'm pissed off at the guy who got her to the loudspeaker, right? Why do you need to do that? She's an 11-year-old girl. She has papers in her hand. It's not like she's saying something. And the bigger issue, one of the big issues, and actually a lot of people on this show that I was yesterday on, there was Ayaz Amir, he's a columnist for the news. He's a really good one. And there was someone else as well, another columnist or a politician, but like they agreed that if she's found not guilty, then she should be, she shouldn't be in jail because she's just a kid. But if it's for her safety, it makes sense. But what they agreed on was apparently she also has Down syndrome.
Oh.
So she doesn't even know she has. So she can't be accused of that.
Yeah.
If I could, yeah. But so they agree. First you need to do a medical assessment, and if she does suffer from Down syndrome, then just let her go. Yeah.
It also asks about the rights of people that have different abilities and stuff. I don't know the laws or education around that, right? What kind of people are people aware of how we should treat people with varying ability and what kind of circumstances are they responsible for their actions and stuff? That'd be a really good discussion. Accessibility also.
I mean, this relates directly to, the next discussion forum is probably going to be on mental health issues in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So that's going to touch upon that. But the one that we're doing today actually touches upon this issue, and the bigger conversation that's happening nowadays is around how we're treating minorities, right? Because you have the Shia attacks, right? And you have major political party leaders like, Altaf Hussain, he's going out and he's making speeches about how you need to protect Shias. That it didn't happen a lot in the last few years. And then you have the issue with the blasphemy case. It's come up again, and a lot of people agree that if not abolished, it should at least be changed. Right? It needs to at least be amended. A majority of people, I think, agree on that, but they're afraid to say it.
Yeah.
And one other thing, and I know of this personally, I posted on the discussion forum as well, on the group, that hundreds of Hindu families are leaving Pakistan because they feel oppressed. So this has been a controversy in the last few weeks as well. I know a friend of mine, his family left.
Yeah.
He's Hindu. He chose to stay on, but his family left Pakistan. Because he's like, we're not safe. Because girls from Hindu families are being girls from Hindu families have been picked up and they are forcibly converted. So they are said, you need to convert to Islam, otherwise.
Where does that matter?
Most of the Hindu community in Pakistan is in Sindh.
Okay.
The vast majority is in Sindh. Interior Sindh. And
so where are they moving to? Back?
India.
India's welcoming them?
That's also been, something that was being talked about. I'm not exactly clear, but India is welcoming them, right, as refugees. But it's disgraceful, right? And there's a debate in the Hindu community as well, right? There's Hindus in the Hindu community who are saying, no, we'll stay in Pakistan and we want to change the system as opposed to running away. But because there's a long history of Hindus in Pakistan, they've always been there. So there's lots of temples, but in major urban areas as well, right? There's lots of temples and stuff. Not a lot, not a lot, but they exist, right? They always have, even before Pakistan was created. So there's, sure. Happening, which is a good one to have, but let's see where it goes.
Yeah, that's we want to do that.
Yeah, maybe we should do a discussion forum on people who are minorities. We did one on women, right?
Yeah.
But that's a different issue.
How 1947, how old is that?
1947? So it turned 65 this year?
65.
Yeah, 47 to now is 65.
65 glorious years.
I don't know about the glorious part, but certainly it's remarkable.
He survived the same.
And do we need to? Is there anything else that you guys have been reading in the news or about Pakistan that you think might be interesting? Are we giving up? You? Come on, at least
I was just.
the attack. There was an attack on an airbase
I just noticed something.
on the 27th. An attack by militants on the army.
Oh, wow.
Happened on the 27th. Oh, right. By the way, I just remembered the attack you mentioned on Shias. It happened on the 27th.
On 27th?
On the 27th
Wait, 27th of what?
of Ramadan.
Oh, 25 days.
The
I'm
27th
looking
of
at the
Ramadan.
date and it's August 25th. And I'm like,
Where are you at?
No, sorry. My bad. Sorry. And the night of the 27th, there was that attack on Kamra, which is an airbase.
yeah.
So,
Is that near Peshawar?
no, it's in Karachi. So, and it was unsuccessful. If you remember, last year there was an attack on PNS Mehran, which is another naval base, and that one was successful to an extent, in the sense that the terrorists were able to get in, and there was a firefight for several hours, and they actually got in and they were able to do some damage. This year they weren't able to do, they were repelled, but just the fact that you have militants that are attacking army installations in the heart of the city is pretty good, right? It should never happen, period, and B, it was a special day, it was the 9th or the 27th, right? And what's really disappointing is that some people in Pakistan say, it's the night of the 27th. A real Muslim could never do that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was on a show last night.
Oh, wow.
They're like, it's the night of the 27th, it's a holy night. And, a real Muslim could never ever do that. So it has to be someone of the outside.
Completely forgetting that there are legitimate concerns, grievances against the army.
Yeah.
For a lot of people in Pakistan.
Well, I mean, even these people who were saying this, even they criticize the army. Everyone has legitimate concerns against the army, except for the army itself, right, in Pakistan.
I think that when the attack happened last year, there was a lot of people saying that there was some proof of people within the army who were connected to...
Yeah, that was the kid, that was what happened with Salim Shahzad, the journalist. So he's a reporter, he was a reporter, and he said that, there was evidence that there was someone inside the Navy. There are elements in the Navy that are sympathizers at least of Al-Qaeda, right? And so he published his report. 2 days later, he was found dead.
Oh, wow.
And
Is it recorded?
yeah, Salim Shahzad.
This
And his
is
book
the
came
same-
out.
Yeah, this is the same thing that's been going on. It was I always remember that article that I think it was Vijay posted that the worst place for reporters to be is Pakistan, because who knows what happens to them a couple days later when they make a break news story.
I think that's exaggerated. I think we have a much more, activist and free media than we used to. So it's a lot better. And I wouldn't there's if you go on the biggest TV channel and they're criticizing the army openly, right, for hours on end, and that's the most powerful entity in the country, so and criticizing politicians and the government happens all the time anyway. So by and large, journalists are able to report on a lot of things, and even conversations like.
Will they survive after reporting a lot of things though?
Yeah, of course. Except for in certain areas, and that's where the concern comes in.
Yeah.
If you're reporting on issues in Balochistan, so Baloch reporters have been attacked, or they've been kidnapped by the state. So that happens. That's specifically to Balochistan because there's a civil war going on, right? They don't acknowledge it that way, but it's happening. So, and even that is a very complicated issue, but.
We have, for those who, if you ever have any, sorry, I should have said this in the beginning as well, if you ever have any questions, we are hashtagging on Twitter. The hashtag is PDF Diaspora. So that's PDF Diaspora. If you listen to this, you can always send in a question. We do have a question from online, from Twitter, but I'll save that for afterwards when you start the conversation.
And also send it to @PDF Pakistan, and your tweet could possibly get retweeted.
Yeah, just like was mentioned, our Twitter following is @PDF Pakistan. So if you have any questions or if you want to have your tweet retweeted by the account, just let us know. Any last words on the current affairs? We can move on to the presentation. Let's move on to the presentation. So next, I would like to introduce to you someone who has been in PDF or has known with PDF since it began. I remember at our first barbecue, I met Sadia. So it's been like 2 years since we've sort of known each other. That's totally irrelevant to the discussion.
She was also the first one who showed up at the original, when we started talking about having a discussion forum. Sadia was the only one who actually showed up. It was Arsalan upstairs.
Oh,
that's
right.
where we met.
Yes, right.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So we have a veteran in the PDF field. Sadia, it's all. Can you tell us what you're doing, what you've done in the past, and what you've been talking about?
Thank you, Ruch. So I have been working with new immigrants to Toronto, specifically from India and Pakistan since 2008. So that's usually in the settlement sector. We provide services, fill out forms. So you see a lot of new immigrants who are on welfare, who are struggling to find employment, who might not even have status, who are struggling to sponsor their relatives, etc. And so in that field, now I am involved in Thorncliffe Park, which is a community that's dominated by Pakistanis and Indian Gujarati speaking community. So there's again a lot of the similar economic struggles there, with the lack of recognition of foreign credentials, of struggles with income employment, of struggles with quote unquote integration. So what I'm going to be talking about today then has to do with my experience with those kind of communities, and to bring a broader analysis of why people from Pakistan have migrated to cities and neighborhoods in Toronto to begin with, what kind of struggles they're facing, and how these struggles are intimately connected with development issues that have been the concentration of PDF for the past little while. So what I'm going to start with is to ask, why do we even talk about the Pakistani diaspora when our concentration is on, development in Pakistan? Why should we bother to concentrate or speak about the diaspora?
I think that this is quite a critical part, because a lot of the most influential people probably left Pakistan. The leaders left Pakistan because they just got frustrated with the conditions over there. So in order to get back that influence, I think that you have to at least reach out to the people who left Pakistan in the first place.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was really excited for this discussion, just because I guess I would be grouped into that complex of the Pakistani diaspora youth. Just because it's sort of like, if you have some sort of connection with Pakistan, or if you're born in Pakistan and then you came here when you're really younger, right? There's always that part of you that's connected to the country, and therefore it's sort of like, I think growing up here, there's a lot of challenges that you face when you're remembering yourself as sort of a Pakistani, but then yourself as a Canadian as well. And so that conversation about whether or not you should sort of do something for your homeland, and then whether or not you should, what identity you choose to continue on with, that always sort of comes up. And I think that's always a challenge for a lot of people that are here. And it's important, to answer your question, it's important because there is some sort of Pakistani-ness, whatever kind it is, because you're born or you're associated with it. Just sort of know something or to maybe avoid it? Like the reasons behind why you make decisions.
So sorry, just restating the question. Sadia asked, why should we care about the Pakistani diaspora, given that we're focusing on development in Pakistan, because the diaspora doesn't really live in Pakistan, right? So by definition, it doesn't live there. So, why should we care about it? Go ahead.
I don't know yet. I don't think about that one.
Hopefully I can answer that for you by the end of the presentation.
That'd be nice.
Or help us think about it. Yeah, I would echo what Wasim and Ruth said, but also remember that the diaspora is a symptom of the problem, but also a cause of the problem in some ways. Can be, often is. Often the diaspora is made up of people who, it's a form of capital flight, but also there's this.
It's a form of what?
Capital flight. So a lot of money that's leaving the country that if it were in the country, then it could be used a lot more productively. And there's accusation that a lot of people, you'll have politicians who are sending their children abroad, but I don't want to say politicians, but the elite send their children abroad, and so that money and that that talent could be used more productively in Pakistan if it were there. So they're actively contributing to the problem. But on the other end, I think it matters for PDF because we're a group of students in the diaspora, and we need to realize our role, but we're a group of students who say we want to help, right? So it's a complicated place to be in.
It's not just very complicated, but I think, speaking for myself and maybe some other people, when you leave Pakistan, especially at a young age, you tend to lose your identity. You don't know who you are, you don't know where you're from, especially if you're growing up. You don't, and at the same time, if you are from Pakistan, you may not want to be linked to Pakistan. If you're going to an all-British school, if you're going to, an all-American school, there is, some backlash that you get from being the only Pakistani in any school whatsoever. So growing up, all of a sudden, you've got that, negative impact on you already. That just because I'm a Pakistani, I'm getting this, I'm getting that, and whatnot. So it's quite interesting, and I think that even how do you stop the bleeding? That's interesting too, because and I guess that's to do with perception as well, how people perceive and whatnot. So how do you make good perceptions from other people, on immigrants coming from Pakistan as well? Because at least if they're going to make the decision to leave, at least that it be a good decision on their part and something that they don't even regret all in all. If they're going to do it, at least they should represent well.
Okay, thank you for your comments. What I'm going to try to do is touch on at least some of what you guys have said. If I don't get to all of it, I would like to maybe come back to it near the end or make those points the subject of discussion, because I do think they're important points. What I'm going to be focusing on more is this perspective from social justice and from poverty, specifically from structural issues. So when I'm talking about the Pakistani diaspora, I'm talking about the poverty that they're facing. Right? I'm talking about the social justice issues that they're facing within the Canadian context, within the US, within the UK, all the developed countries that a lot of Pakistanis have migrated out to. But of course, because my experience in my life has been lived in Toronto, a lot of this will be from that experience, and so drawing from Toronto and Pakistani community here. So let's start with why Pakistanis migrate out of Pakistan. So I think some of that has been mentioned, that people either want to pursue further education for their children, want to give them opportunities, they want to maybe escape some of the economic and social and political problems that are going on in Pakistan.
And it's also the status as well, the status of having a Canadian citizenship or a Canadian visa. That speaks for itself.
Definitely, yeah. So, the status of leaving Pakistan to be able to, call yourself a Canadian citizen or a US citizen. So there are pull forces and there are push forces, right? There are pulling forces from a country like Canada about the status, about the perceived opportunities that are available here that are not in Pakistan, about the kinds of things that your kids and your generations might have access to that you might not. And there's push forces, right, that are pushing you out of Pakistan. So those might be the socioeconomic political problems, those might be the lack of educational opportunities, the expense associated with the good educational opportunities, etc. So I'm going to talk about first the push forces that are pushing you out of Pakistan. And those forces are often forces that are intimately connected to or the same as the underdevelopment. The forces in Pakistan that are causing the underdevelopment, that are causing the poverty. Right? So one of the articles that I would recommend for anyone who wants to follow up with this is by a Pakistani called Haris Gazdar, and he has written extensively about outmigration from Pakistan. And so some of the things that he says in terms of structural problems for why people are leaving is that since the 1990s, there's been increased liberalization and structural adjustment programs in Pakistan, which have resulted in even lower investment in education and other social programs. That has meant that there's greater privatization, that there's greater polarization between the rich and the poor, that has ignited some political conflicts or made them worse. And so these are some of the broader economic sort of structures that are in play. The effect has been of the structural adjustment that there's slower growth rates, there's increasing poverty, and there's declines in investment. Right? So people want to just get out. Then there's the fiscal management, right? So we can blame IMF, we can blame the US for some of the structural adjustment, some of the debt, but there's also our own elite and our ruling class in Pakistan that's responsible for fiscal mismanagement. And so the two biggest sources of fiscal spending is the military and the debt servicing, right? So the debt is to IMF or whatever other countries that we owe to. And the military, we know, is a very powerful force in Pakistan. So with debt servicing and military taken together, that's 80% of government spending, right? So that leaves very little for social services in a country that's already so behind in so many ways. Okay. Yes.
That's a really great point. I remember that from our last discussion on education. The reason why we don't have money to sort of continue on or increasing the state, increasing the level of our public health education system is because money is sort of spent towards debt serving and military spending. So that's cool to note that I'm following rule number 7 and building upon my last discussion.
Very good. And so, so as we said, that poverty is increasing, right? But the poorest of the poor are not the ones who are coming to Canada, right? The poorest of the poor in Pakistan are being disadvantaged by these advances the most, but they're not the ones who are coming. The people, so who's out migrating to these developed countries? They are what Gazdar calls the non-poor, right? So, and there's different ways that these non-poor of Pakistan are coming outside. So there are formal channels and there are informal channels of coming out. Right, so now, yeah, good job, Aruj. So we're talking about what are the things that are bringing these people out. Who are these people? So they're either, there's skilled workers, right? So I can talk about my own father who emigrated from Saudi to Canada, and he brought all of us in our immediate family to Canada. If he sponsored other people, family sponsorship is another way that a lot of people can come to Canada when their parents or grandparents or extended family is sponsored. In both cases, Gazdar says that these are people from upwardly mobile classes that end up coming. Right? Why? Because immigration costs.
There's also the investor as well,
right.
The option. And the problem though now is that in order to actually come in, you have to actually have more.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the problem now. Like Canada's just asking for more money, and so that kind of restricts.
Right. I think what it used to be was that for the investor class, you'd need to invest about $600,000 right when you get to Canada, and that is like almost an unimaginable amount for the vast majority of people in Pakistan.
You say 400,000?
600,000.
I think it used to be 400,000
Yeah.
a while ago, and
Yeah,
now
now it's
only
maybe-
recently it just went up to 6. Yeah.
So these are the people who are coming from the formal channels, and there's also the international students, many of whom we know, who have come here because their families are able to afford their tuition and their stay here. So these are the formal channels. The informal channels are then people who are coming as refugees. Right? Is anybody familiar with how you become a refugee in Canada?
You apply for refugee status.
How does that
Based
work?
on the fact that you might be harmed in your country, and
You identify as a member of a certain population.
Really? Yeah. So where do you apply for refugee status? In Pakistan?
Like Canadian Foreign Service? Is that
So there are a few channels, right? So sometimes there are UNHCR agencies in Pakistan that might be able to help you. Sometimes if your case is compelling enough, you might be sponsored by a church. If you're a Christian in Pakistan, there might be another group that might be able to sponsor you. The most common way though is people will either come with a visitor visa, or they will just find a way to get themselves to any Canadian border, right? So either by sea or by land or by plane. And as soon as you come to the Canadian border, under international law, you are allowed to apply for refugee status, right? And then under international law, you're supposed to get a fair hearing to determine whether you classify as a refugee or not. A fair hearing. But of course, as we know, the government of Canada has continuously slashed all of those fair hearing and international laws, in fact, that are supposed to guarantee you these rights to be able to be considered. Some of the things that they've slashed is they've come up with a safe third country agreement, which means that if you're coming from the US, which used to mean if you're coming from the US, you cannot apply for refugee status because the US is safe, and so if they refused you, then you cannot apply here. Now, sorry.
No. I mean,
Yeah, I'm gonna
if you
talk
bang
on
on the
it, and
table,
it's not gonna go.
Like so.
I will try to control my limbs. But now what they're going to do is they're going to expand the safe country list. So they're going to almost arbitrarily put together a list of safe countries around the world from which you cannot apply for refugee status, but you're deemed that it's not possible that anybody is persecuted there, right? And so forget about your refugee claim being heard. And the other thing is that they're going to just put all refugee claimants into jail for a year and then figure out if you are good enough or not and try to deport you as fast as possible. What this means is that while people still need to have enough money to be able to at least afford a plane ticket, afford the smuggling costs of the informal ways, afford some way to get here, so that is more money than most Pakistanis can afford still. Sometimes it can be like $10,000, sometimes it can be $20,000. So there are people who are still kind of well off, but this is the only channel where people who are kind of medium well off are able to have a chance to come to Canada, right? Of course, it's likely that their chance is not going to be granted because the government is making it very, very hard.
Some social assistance as well, because there's some people that are here under no status and whatnot, then they apply for social assistance and they get
Right. The only way you can get social assistance is if you are a refugee claimant, which means that if you have already submitted your refugee claim and you have been told that you are in the waiting list, and so you can apply for social assistance. However, that is very, very complicated in social assistance. The rates are so low that you would be very hard pressed to find any place to live, much less, be able to afford decent food, etc. So briefly, immigration to developed countries has by and large involved young men from better off and upward mobile families and communities in Pakistan. Right? The refugee class often are the ones that we're talking about, the persecuted minorities. Specifically in the community that I worked in, which was north of Tobacco, there was a huge population of Ahmadi Pakistanis who were granted refugee status here as a result of their persecution.
That's near Maple?
That's near Maple, yes. And near Finch and Islington, there is a co-op building that's entirely like an Ahmadi building. So they have an extensive community there. They have very strong ties within the community. That is not true for much of the rest of the Pakistani community.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. We can talk
Thank you
more
for
about
telling us you didn't know that. It's very cool.
You're welcome. Did you know that?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So what all these people, the refugees and the people who come from the formal class share is at least 12 years of education that they have in common. That's a common characteristic, and in this regard, they're from among the top 1/7 of Pakistan's population. Right? So that's still a very small percentage that are able to come here one way or another. Moving on to, so they get themselves here, they're skilled workers, they've been sponsored, or they're here as refugees. What is the reality that they face in Canada? Right? So, how many have you guys have read that article by, what's his name? Hotisa Heather?
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah.
A few months ago in Dawn.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Is he from Ryerson?
yes, he's from Ryerson. So Hotisa Heather's piece was about how Pakistani Canadians have become the new face of poverty. And that 44% of Pakistan-born immigrants fell below the poverty line in Canada. And so this was, of course, very, very interesting. That the Pakistani Canadians are the second most likely to be poor in terms of ethnic groups. I think Bangladeshi is the first one. So, like usually the top groups that don't really move is Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Somali, Afghan, that tend to be remaining the very poorest of the poor in Toronto and in Canada in general. So why are these groups poor? Right? Why do you guys think, if we concentrate on Pakistanis, why do you think Pakistanis are doing that?
I think it's, again, going back to the discussion we were having, adaptability, being able to adapt to culture. I mean, if you compare, let's say, and I noticed that India's not really in that group. They might not be far up, but they're not in that group. And I just look at all those cultures and whatnot. There's a huge culture shock as soon as they come here too. All of a sudden they notice all these things and they have trouble adapting. And they notice that a lot of the things that they're used to is just so different that they're not able to even get to a point where they're able to work or where they're able to provide for themselves. And that's my input on it, but it's not obviously background things.
Does anyone else have something to contribute? Why do you think Pakistanis are poor here?
I think just because of the big cultural difference, right? When you come into sort of adjusting with that, so when you're coming from a country that has a lot of cultural norms that are embedded and you grew up with that through schooling, then you come to a country like Canada where everything, I guess, is more liberal or more, everyone has more rights or like the chance to do whatever they want, pursue whatever they want, and there's not as much negativity against them. Just sort of dealing with that, trying to manage like what you want to do, what you can't do, sort of like the clash between that, and like it comes back down to the same thing of like job prospects, right? If you're, this is not related, but like if you're a skilled worker or if you're educated in Pakistan, but when you come here, I'm guessing there's a lot of sort of transition exams you have to do, or your degrees and recognizing stuff. So those challenges, and then when you have to start all over again from like the bottom, right? A lot of people struggle with that. Because it's like if you're an adult and you come here and you're told that you have to start from the bottom and go back to school, like a lot of people, like I'm just from my experience just talking to sort of relatives and stuff, both family friends that are here, it's a challenge. If you're 40 and you have kids, like how do you go back to school and still like take care of your family?
Is this statistic Pakistanis who are born here?
Pakistani immigrants, so they're first generation.
Yeah.
I think I think there's different reasons, and I think the explanation about culture is lacking, because if that were the case, then there's people who come here from Bolivia, or there's people who come here from Malaysia, and they don't have any problems. There's not as many, but it can't just pin it down to culture. I think there's a lack of access to services. There's lots of barriers to entry, and there's a series of biases, implicit and explicit. So, for example, if you graduate from IIM in India, you're more likely to be recognized than you are if you graduated from any university in Pakistan. So that's an explicit bias that you might have to go through an additional series of credentials, which costs a lot of money that a lot of people don't have, because in the first place they've come here because they didn't have money. and then there's implicit biases, and increasingly there's a series of biases against the country and everyone associated with. So stigma attached with being Pakistani that Basim spoke about a little while ago. That you don't want to identify as a Pakistani, and if you're the only one in an all-white school, so there's that stigma attached, and that translates into getting jobs.
But then with that, it's sort of like,
sorry, can I just finish? Sorry. I think one more thing that I would add is that the Pakistani community is not well organized and doesn't have the resources that say the Sikh community has built up over the years. That if anyone from the Sikh community comes into Canada, they are integrated well because there's this entire network of organizations and people who will help them out. The Pakistani community is split up and is not well coordinated, I think. So it's both ways.
But then if you throw in like the big, the religion aspect of it, right? If you have a Muslim majority country and sort of like the conservatism around that, I don't know if my terminology is correct, but a lot of sort of, roles, like gender roles come into play as well. Can certain women do this? Like if they're being taken care of their men. Like, so I guess that would sort of lessen the chances, possibly lessen the chances of a lot of sort of individuals stepping up. And struggling with that, like if you're, struggling with the religious differences.
That's a good point. I know from I can give you one personal case. My dad's cousin. He's a little bit more conservative than my father is, and the rest of our family. And when he came to Kuwait, this isn't Canada, but this is an example I'll give you. When he came to Kuwait, he had this pharmacy job, but his boss was a woman. So he actually told my father, like, I cannot work there because she bosses me around. And so my dad's like, well, then go back to Pakistan and be poor. Like, that's what my father told him. And so, and that's one case, very, very alienated, very in the corner, of course. But there could be that impression. And when I do go to during Ramadan, I went to the Toronto Islamic Center over here. A lot of the people there are Pakistanis, and they think a lot of them, they settle for what they have. And even though they have degrees from other universities and stuff, they'll be settled into, let's do dawah and let's do this and that, I know I must be generalizing a lot, but I do think culture plays a big deal. India, in my opinion, Indians, they will do whatever it has to take to fit in and do well. And I think they have that drive. I do believe a lot of Pakistanis do, and I do think a majority of them do. But I also think there are some of them who have that stigma attached.
And from personal experience, you're right on the money with the cultural aspect. There's some also, weird stuff that happens as well when it comes to spiritualism and so the different cultures and different religions and whatnot. Just the belief structures are very different as well when you compare it to a more balanced society and whatnot. It's very difficult to kind of say more about it. But what you might find is that the kind of beliefs that people have is just very focused on spiritualism, and there's a real negative stigma attached to it as well, I feel.
So allow me to ask a question to clarify some of what has been said here. So you guys have been identifying culture and religion as a barrier that newcomers impose on themselves to integration or to fully realizing their potential. But I want to ask, in your minds, how do you guys see culture as being a barrier to their income or to their employment?
Okay. If all of a sudden, someone comes in, and I'm going to hypothetically speak here. Someone comes in and all of a sudden lands their first job, and all of a sudden sees something wrong with the workplace, feels as if there's weird stuff, there's job or something like that, and that's something that can actually happen. And all of a sudden, this is the right place. So all of a sudden, pack up your bags, go here. And I think that and again, it's going back to generalization, but I think there's a lot of moving around and a lot of high frequency moving around. It's very tough for a Canadian Pakistani immigrant family to settle down piece as well?
It's definitely a difficult question to answer because before I heard this statistic, I've read other statistics which say the children of immigrants in general, not any specific group, but the children of immigrants in general are making higher incomes than indigenous Canadians.
Indigenous, do you mean?
Indigenous meaning they've been here for 2 or 3 generations.
So you mean white Canadians?
White Canadians mostly. They're making higher incomes than them. And when I heard the statistics, I honestly I was a little shocked. It was kind of interesting at the same time. But culture and income, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Maybe one thing is that I know if my uncle were here and if this guy had to work in a workplace where there are women as well, I hope he'd smarten up, but he might quite possibly say, no, I cannot take this job because I cannot be under a woman or something. So he'd probably settle for a labor job or something. And there's one thing we should also keep in mind is that how many, I know for Afghanistan, Somalia, and maybe even Pakistan recently, I don't have the statistics, but it's possible that a lot of the immigrants have come under refugee status and don't have a special skill, which would make it very hard to be employed. Unlike other nations, a lot of the times they're skilled workers and they do have engineering skills, they do have medical skills, whatever. So that's one thing I'd also want to check up on before I make a decision.
Sure. So in terms of keep in mind when you're talking about culture and religion that the vast majority of people from Pakistani origin who are here are from the upper classes, right?
Yeah.
So they're very highly educated. Even within Pakistan, they're often, perceived and self-perceived as being well integrated into Western mindsets and Western lifestyles, right? And so, the cultural argument sometimes is made for people who are poor, who are from the lower classes, which itself is a very problematic stereotype. But I think the self-perception of a lot of people who come from Pakistan here is that we're modern, that we've left the backwardness of Pakistan, and so sometimes the cultural things don't play out in the same way.
Let me ask a question. Maybe, but this could, and that comes back to a general question: what really defines culture? Because let me ask you a question: how do Pakistani businessmen deal with each other?
How do they do it?
Well, I'm not trying to generalize, but I do think that it's certainly different from how regular Canadians do business with one another.
In what way?
Well, I think that there, from what I've seen, at least, in the more upscale area, you might find a lot more shaky business. I just think that the way things are done is just a lot more different and whatnot. It's just a different mentality. You're bringing that.
Corruption stuff, or
Not necessarily corruption, but I don't give a bleak mentality. It kind of this is what it. You might put your ego in front of a business deal just because you might want to make this work or whatever, that sort of thing. And I see that quite a bit. Just given.
Do you think that's unique to a certain community?
No, absolutely not. But
Then why does that community suffer more from it than others?
Could be though, because I was reading an article where it was talking about Pakistani businesses. A lot of the time they'll favor putting their family members into positions. This is what the article stated, that a lot of Pakistani businesses become inefficient in the long run because they favor putting their family members in positions of power as opposed to those who are actually qualified to do something. And they tend to make it a family-run business affair. So one of the things is, I don't know, that'd be something that would fall into play, but I obviously don't know anything about it.
If I could just, and I think I've seen the opposite as well. There's been studies to show the opposite, that they might put some of their family members in positions of power, but often it's the exploitation, right? Where you're able to exploit your, mame ka beta and whatever more so than you can someone off the street, because you have to pay them in wage and benefits. Whereas if someone is from your family, you can kind of just do it all under the sheet. Yes, the bill.
Sorry, I was going to say that if that is a reason for failure, then why is that thing cited as a reason, why is that trait, basically nepotism, putting your own family members in places, in jobs, why is that thing cited as a reason for the success of the Sikh community? They succeed because they do it and we fail because we do it? That doesn't really, I don't understand it. That's what I'm saying.
So this is a really good discussion, but I'm going to take it a little step further as well, because so Pakistani diaspora has been in North America since the early 20th century. Were some of the first Pakistanis who came to the US and Canada, mostly as students to study in U of T, in prestigious universities, etc. But a community as such, as someone that you can actually study and find trends in, has been more recent, right? The South Asian community. And the South Asian community actually that comprises of the Indian subcontinent is the biggest visible minority in Toronto. Right? I think in the next 5-6 years, it's going to be over 50% of Toronto is going to be South Asian. Right? So this is a huge community. So that's why we have to be even more careful when we generalize, and when we generalize in a way to put the burden on the community members themselves and not the larger society. Right? Because I think one thing to remember is that of course, there are individual flaws of character in each person, but we as immigrants, especially as immigrants of color, are coming into a white society. Right? And so a white developed society that is well known or has a history of genocide of its own peoples and of other racialized communities that have come through. Right? Exploitation, genocide for the sake of profit. Right? And so I think it's helpful to keep that in mind. It's not, I know some people dismiss that as, it's the victim mentality. But the opposite, I think, is a lot more dangerous. When, you're agreeing with Stephen Harper, when you're agreeing with Jason Kenney, the Minister of Immigration, to say that we don't owe any responsibilities or rights to immigrants because it's immigrants' own responsibility to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. We will not help them with any other social services. Right? So that's a very dangerous slippery slope that a lot of people from within our own community have tended to adopt, and when they've become representatives of this community have then sort of perpetuated, which has meant that this community, instead of coming out from poverty, has sunk deeper and deeper into it, right? Because 44% of Pakistani immigrants is almost half, right? So that's very significant, and that's a structural issue. And so we're going to look at it as a structural issue.
And I think going back to leadership as well, could the leaders have tried and just got frustrated and came to a point where they just like, okay, I will do whatever it takes for my own survival. I don't care about anyone else.
Well, the question to ask is, how do some people become leaders in this context, right? What kind of views would they have to adopt in order to come to those positions? So yes, there are, increasingly within the mainstream political parties, there is visible minority representation, but what does that mean for the communities? Often not very much at all. Right? In terms of economic advantage, it doesn't mean anything. And so when we're talking about immigrants, I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about racialized immigrants. Are you guys familiar with the term racialized? So what racialized means is that we usually talk about visible minority, right? But visible minority can change over time. People with different skin colors at different points in history have been discriminated against, right? White people have been discriminated against, as early as the 1930s and 40s, right? When the beaches would say that no Jews or dogs allowed, against Catholics, against Irish immigrants, etc. So racialization is the process where there are people, as an ethnic group, have been alienated and have been put into a position of disadvantage, economic, social, and cultural. And so when you're talking about racialized people in the current context, it is people who are non-white, right? And we're talking about including indigenous people. Indigenous meaning First Nations of Canada, right? So racialized immigrants, consistently, every time there is a study of poverty in Canada, especially within Toronto, racialized immigrants have been the lowest of the poor, the poorest of the poor, right? And we are talking about Pakistanis, but there is a trend to follow, right? And not only is there a trend, but that should necessitate a solidarity as well, to say that, well, why are these other communities suffering as we are? And as soon as we use the cultural reason, then that becomes kind of a threatening issue.
It's me versus you, it's your community versus my community, and my culture versus your culture.
Right.
Competition.
Right, exactly.
And in this context, it's unhealthy competition
because we have a common enemy, which is Jason Kenney, which is the system that robs us of our basic rights and prevents us from living lives in dignity.
I don't know if it's a person, but it's a system.
It's a system. I mean, I like to say that he is.
The system?
Yeah. Well, he's not this. He's just one of the faces of the system.
Exactly. He's the current face.
He's the current face. He will be changed. So some of the reasons that we can talk about then. Pakistani immigrants tend to be very highly educated, right? So vast majority of them have post-secondary education. Vast majority of them have work experience, professional work experience. Are you guys familiar with skilled worker class? What does that class mean? What does it mean that you're a skilled worker when you're coming to Canada?
You have some skills.
You're like an engineer, doctor,
Yeah.
a lawyer.
Why those professions and not something else? Why not sweeper? Why not?
Employable.
Who determines that you're employable?
The industries. I mean, that's like whatever is the industry that's thriving, where more innovation happens, better. It's a decision made by the government.
Does that include like trade work?
Yeah, it includes
Skilled
some
trades,
things.
yeah.
Skilled trades, whatever. So like carpenter and stuff.
Right.
Whatever contributes to GDP growth, rainmaking per se.
Right, so the government, the Canadian government has come up with 29 professions which it has deemed need people to come in. So basically, Canada as a society, we have a huge land mass, but we don't have very many people, right? The people that we have who have been here, the white Canadians that we have, who tend to be like the Canadians, are predominantly getting very old, are not employable anymore, or are dying off. What does that mean? That if we don't have enough people who are working, they're not contributing to taxes. That means this country that runs on taxes is not going to stay afloat as a society, right? And therefore we need more workers to come in to not only do jobs, but also essentially to contribute to the tax base. So that
29
skilled professions that are under the skilled worker class. So skilled worker class is supposed to be that, okay, we have a shortage in 29 industries, we don't have enough qualified people, and these are industries that are very critical, so we're going to bring in people from the outside, right? And this is not just that, okay, people apply and then we're going to come in, we're going to go out and recruit them as well, right? So as my dad was working in Saudi Arabia during the 90s, and at that point there was some initial development of the oil sands in Alberta, and so they were recruiting for oil industry professionals. And as he was working in the oil industry in Saudi, there were recruiters coming from Canada to recruit him and his colleagues from there. Of course, they weren't told that they would, be living in poverty for a long time or not be given those jobs. They were told that, apply and come. We will have jobs for you, right? Show them all the leafy forests and maple leaf trees, etc. And so then my dad came here, and we, as a family, came here in 1998. And of course, when he came, his credentials as a geologist were worth nothing. He had to go back from his BA all the way up to a master's degree that he would have to get from here, which was not an option because we were 3 small children, and we needed to be able to survive while he could not go to back to school full time. And at that point, he was probably 45, close to 50, and so that seemed like another 10 years worth of full-time education and investment didn't seem like a good possibility. And so what did he do? He gave up on that, and he started delivering newspapers, and he started delivering medicines for Shoppers Drug Mart. Right? And both of those jobs are cash jobs, right? So that means that you don't pay taxes, that means that you don't have any benefits, and that means that you don't contribute to CPP, which means that you will have nothing to look forward to when you retire, right? And so what that means is that, yes, my mom has been working full-time in call centers since we came. My dad's been working full-time, 4 jobs between those deliveries. And yes, I'm privileged in a lot of ways that we own our own house. We're struggling to pay the mortgage, but we own it. Of course, all 3 of us siblings have to go take OSAP, so we're not income secure by any means, but we're a lot better off than a lot of people within the Pakistani community here, right? The problem of international credentials not being recognized while international professionals are being recruited for a particular industry is essentially a problem of social justice, right? Because it's a fundamental injustice that you advertise to people who are professionals who are doing very well in their industries and bring them here and then tell them that there's nothing for you here unless you invest tens of thousands of dollars, right? a little side note that often it's universities that do the credential assessment, right? Which seems like a conflict of interest to me, because if, of course, you're going to tell people that you're going to invest tens of thousands of dollars in us, you're not good enough, because they're universities, they seek to gain from it, right? So even the credential evaluation process on its own is rife with, problems. It's very transparent. I've been doing my work is with the credential evaluation right now with regulated professions, and we're seeing over and over again all the kinds of things that are involved that can be used to deny you your status, right? It can be you're not of good character and you have to practice in Ontario for 12 months. And often, bullshit. Right. And so how are you supposed to survive? Where do you bring thousands of dollars just to get your degrees assessed, right? And so there are all those barriers right there. Yes.
So I had a question. So from what I've heard from immigration counselors actually, is that this problem of false advertising is there's a number of players who are active. Like there's people who will be abroad who are profiting off it, who will set up consultancies and they're going to try and make money off it, and the government has apparently been trying to stop that, right? So for example, the government has not advertised for doctors in a while, right? But there's still doctors coming in, and the government is saying we don't want doctors, right? So how do you address that problem? The problem that you mentioned of you're looking for a certain class. Well, you say you're looking for them, but you're not actually, right? So how do you address that problem when you can't pin down who's responsible?
I think there are two sides to the problem, right? Because there really is a shortage of doctors in Canada. Right?
Yeah.
There really is a shortage of health.
But it's a specialized profession, so sort of a cardiologist would be a very, very specialized, but then an ophthalmologist would be something completely different. So how do you really and then there's a general doctor.
No. My question is, I don't think there's a shortage of cardiologists and ophthalmologists who are here in Canada who want to work and have the skills. And I mean, it speaks to a deeper issue about it's doctors getting the Royal College here in Canada. That's the barrier, as I understand it. But when citizenship CIC, when they call for when they advertise that we need these skills trades and you should apply, I don't think that they are looking for doctors, right? That's not one of the skills that gives you points when you're applying, right?
So the 29 professions hasn't really changed. Is the problem on their website? It's still the point system. That's one of the problems. Often the hot potato gets passed around, right, in terms of who to blame, because the government will, immigrants.
By the way, I'm not blaming. I want to have this discussion. But it's usually that immigrants will say that we were told to come here because the government advertises for this. The government says that we told you, but you should have done your research and you should have known that you're going to have all these problems. And then the credential evaluation agencies say that it's on you. You should have submitted your documents back when you were still in Pakistan. And then the social service agencies tell you that you can just spend the money. And so everyone's not really on the same page as to where this starts at all, and often at the end the blame just comes to the immigrant because that's the clearly identifiable person, right, in terms of being racialized, being a parent. You have to leave.
I have to leave. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Catch you guys later.
So the immigrant gets blamed.
Did you learn anything? Do you want to ask that?
So sorry. Just before we do, everyone sort of talks as one thing that they learned from their time here.
One thing I learned is that the Pakistanis as a cultural people are poor. I didn't know that. That's interesting to know. I thought immigrants were doing well, but it seems like it's other immigrants, not Pakistanis. But
if I can make a request, could you share that research that you cited with us?
Yeah.
So we can see,
I'll post it on the PDF thing.
Yeah, please, please share it, and maybe we're wrong. So please share your research.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, guys.
Awesome, thanks.
To add to his point, when we're naturally surrounded, in a social community, we have that sort of environment around us, but we don't exactly go and go to Overly or we go to McDonald's or anything like that. Right? So that's why I think we get that perception that we're doing well, but when you look at our core facts, it's a different story.
Right. And because the people who are most visible are the people who do really well in immigrant communities, right? Whenever you see, the awards galas, or you see a politician bring a Pakistani up, or you see a Pakistani politician, that's what you see. That I came with $12 in my pocket, and now I'm the MP of something or another. And so it's always the MP. It's always the people who do really successful, who are featured in like immigrant magazines, etc., etc. And that's the narrative, right? That if you would just try hard enough, if you were just committed enough, everyone can make it. And what that does is that it takes away all responsibility from structures that are responsible for the poverty of the majority of people.
Yeah.
So yes, sorry, I didn't get into your question too much, but yes, suffice it to say that the whole process is just full of inconsistencies and contradictions, and at every level, right? And so what it ends up meaning is that they're very trained, highly skilled immigrants who are left trying to run around and find what to do, right? So in my work, we're now being paid to put together the process in front of us and trying to say, okay, what does this look like as soon as you apply? Where do you have to pay the fees? Which exams do you have to write? And what requirements do you have to fulfill before you're done? And that itself is so confusing, and we are people whose first language is English, who have the time to devote to this, and still it's difficult for us to do. But imagine someone who has just come and is looking for a place to live, who's looking to put their kids in school, and on top of that, they also have to deal with.
So then, what about the YMCA's? What about the YMCA's? I mean, they do advertise that they're supposed to help the immigrants with positioning them in the right place. What about those?
Right, so Nabil and I were talking about the social service industry that has cropped up supposedly to respond to these needs, right? But often YMCA and all the social service industry that is supposed to do that, all they do often is that they tinker with your resume to say, oh, well, in Canada you don't write your resume that way, so we'll fix that for you. Or in Canada you don't write your cover letter that way, we'll fix it for you. Or in Canada you're supposed to shake hands, right? Or this is the interview skills. But that's as far as they go, right? And so those things take for granted that there is something lacking in the immigrant, right? That's the mindset.
That's a good point.
Right? That there's something to be fixed in the immigrant, and so that puts all the responsibility, all the blame that if you're not doing well enough, it's your own fault. And actually these agencies are funded to not do anything else, because if they do advocacy, and advocacy means when you're trying to say question structure, you're going to lose all your funding if you start doing advocacy.
That's just sort of like I was reading on the social determinants of health, right? It's like, so my background is sort of physical activity, and to think that sort of if you're in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, you are overweight because you as an individual aren't taking responsibilities to sort of do something to help yourself. Then the other side to it is the model that suggests that the environment around you is sort of leading through your sort of overweightness, or because of the fact that you're overweight, because healthy food options aren't sort of available and food is expensive. So that's like kind of parallels what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
And I haven't even thought of it like that too, right? That you can sort of take the model and sort of implement it into the diaspora community.
Yeah, definitely. So that's what the social service agency and often like everyone, even immigrants themselves, just absorb all of that narrative. And that's often not something that's shared by a lot of people from the upper classes, right? Across the world, that we did it on our own because we worked hard and because we earned this money. And everybody else who's poor is poor because they're just lazy, right?
Yeah.
And so when you have that attitude that's very prevalent, then that just means that there is a lack of actual services provided to them that respond to their needs.
Yeah.
And so because if you can't even identify who the problem is, except the immigrant, you're not going to try to fix anything else except the immigrant. So that's where people don't get their credentials evaluated, because even to start it, it's thousands of dollars and might be several years before you can do it. So they're like, forget it. And it's not necessarily that they're settling for less, because if somebody has spent 30 years of their life getting educated as a doctor, as an engineer, and had all these hopes of practicing in Canada, I don't think anybody would be like, oh yeah, screw it, I don't really care. I think they genuinely want to share that, because we know as people who've gone through university, and we know as of our parents, that they hold their profession as their identity. Right?
Yeah.
That's a very dear part of their identity. Yes, I'm a doctor. yes, I'm an engineer, yes, I'm a teacher. Nobody wants to let that go and be like, oh, I'm anonymous, I just work at a call center, I just work as a delivery person. Nobody wants to say that. Often it's circumstances like that that push them to just be like, okay, well, there's nothing else available for me, right? So even my dad, he is incredibly ashamed of being a delivery person, right? He won't tell even his brother what he's doing because he's afraid that his brother will laugh at him. And he will laugh at him because that is...
I hope not.
Sorry?
I hope not.
He told his niece, and his niece laughed at him, and so he just decided to not tell him.
Yeah.
There's just one thing I also want to add. Also the policies. I mean, if you look at the social assistance policies and all the the refugee status policies and getting basically additional, well, just basically getting any sort of assistance whatsoever. There is a disincentive. As you start getting it, there's a disincentive to work. So even that, all of a sudden you start receiving the money. So those who are receiving the money, they're moving away from the workforce, and even getting into the workforce, the way it's actually positioned is it's almost as if we will give you, let's say, we will give you $1, we're going to take away $1 from your, so they may not even see the point to try. There's no motivation to actually work, if you think about it.
So, about social assistance, how much do you guys think a person gets a month on social assistance? If it's a single person per month?
300.
500. So
I thought it was 600. I thought it was 600.
Yeah, 570 is what they get for a month. So one person. So they're supposed to find a place to rent.
Yeah.
That's welfare.
That's well.
Yeah.
Is it different now?
ODSP is different. OW, Ontario Works is welfare.
Okay.
Yeah. So what that means is that we have $570 in which you have to pay your rent and try to find an apartment in Toronto that's if you're lucky, you'll find something that's exactly $600, right? You might find a basement, but that's all of your month's spending, right? So how are you supposed to deal with food, with transportation, even to go look for a job interview? You need to have tokens to get there.
Yeah.
If you don't,
You need a suit.
you need a suit. You need to be looking decent, right?
Buy a
I should need a suit. That might be like not.
No, and so that's not even possible,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of activist groups that are saying that this is ridiculous. These are like starvation level rates, and these are very purposely made that low, right? Because the conservatives have been saying for a long time that if you give people money, they just won't want to work. So make that money so low that nobody would want to go on it. The reality is though that there's lots of people who cannot find jobs, right? There is actually a lack of jobs. Why? Because a lot of them have been shipped overseas, and a lot of them, every time the workers have fought to gain rights, the company has shut down and moved somewhere else, or the company's been like, oh fine, screw you all, we can just move somewhere else, right? And so there is actually a lack of jobs, and at the same time, the jobs that are available, it's not enough to be able to support yourself or your family, right? There's research to show that if someone is working minimum wage full-time, 40 hours a week, you will still be below the poverty line, right? So that means, no matter how hard you're working, it's not about how hard you're working. It has to do with how low the minimum wage is, how expensive, anything is, the basic needs are. So, there is affordable housing, but there's a 13-year wait list in Toronto for affordable housing.
And there's I think it's 144,000 people who are on the wait list, and 80,000 of them are single women.
Yeah.
So, which adds barrier.
Exactly.
Adds barriers.
So when you talk about like poverty, and in Toronto, most of the people who are poor are racialized again, right? They're South Asian, they're East Asian, they're Black, they're Indigenous Canadians. So it is a problem of race, right? It is not just a problem of economics, it is a problem of race, because not everyone is affected in the same way. Even when you look at just immigrant communities are not affected in the same way.
Yeah.
White immigrants are not suffering in this way. Right? If you come from a country whose first language is English, which is usually European or the US, you will not be suffering. There's statistics to show that the poverty experience is by visible minority immigrants.
And then that's like South Asians.
Right.
Right.
And it is South Asians as well. Yeah. So one of the reports that's really good with this is called Canada's Economic Apartheid, and that basically looks at. You guys are familiar with apartheid? What was apartheid? What is apartheid?
It was segregation of blacks in South Africa based on race. So they weren't allowed to have certain jobs or go to certain universities. And it's basically segregation and discrimination based on ethnic skin.
Right. And so the argument for Canada's economic apartheid is that because although we have an official multiculturalism policy, there seems to be that the poverty and clusterization of immigrants is racialized. Right? So white people in Canada are not facing poverty in the same way that racialized people are. And therefore, it is not a coincidence if it is across the board. It seems to be very intentional.
Yeah, if you come here from London or from Eastern Europe, your experience is going to be dramatically different from if you're coming from Lagos, Nigeria.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, studies have shown that even like HR managers that look at resumes, as soon as they see your name and it sounds ethnic, they're likely to toss it, even if it's the exact same resume as someone with a white sounding name. So forget about even coming in front of a person. Your name will just doom you, right?
And that's why a lot of people from the Chinese community will change their name. They will, they will call themselves Peter or John.
One word and
Yeah. It happens much less in, I think, in the South Asian, in the Pakistani community. People will change their names, anglicize them, but it's happened a lot. Certainly in the Indian and the Chinese community, they do it a lot because of this, because this discrimination exists.
It's very much a reality.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's very interesting, how we can connect this to what we're talking about in Pakistan, is what Galabuzi, who is the author of The Economic Apartheid in Canada, he says that an ironic parallel in this increasingly globalized economy can be drawn between their work, of the racialized communities, and their contribution of free slave labor to the emergence of industrial capitalism. Right? So when you have whole bunch of people who are asking for very little, who are being forced to ask for very little and slave away, which is often what precarious work means, right? You can be called any time for however long work for less than minimum wage and not be given any benefits whatsoever. And that is often how a lot of these industries that are still surviving in the manufacturing are operating, because they're able to exploit these immigrants. And not just them, the social service industry, right? Immigrants are often told they need quote-unquote Canadian experience, right? We don't know what that is really, except discrimination, right? Except another way to say that, we don't want you. But often social service industries will tell you that, come volunteer for us and we'll give you Canadian experience. So that means that these are highly trained professionals who are, doing basically slave labor because they're not getting anything for it, day in, day out, for hours and hours a week, while they're struggling to make ends meet at home, and they're supposed to be doing, gathering their Canadian experience.
And then they're told you're not working hard enough.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So.
Say, imagine, and I can speak from personal experience. For example, my dad, he worked at a community. It was what is it called? How would you describe it? Yeah, it was an immigrant integration center. And he was contributing to them for a year, 15 or 20 hours a week, no pay, nothing. And he's passed all the credentials and everything. But so that's an example. And then if you say it's a lack of culture, or he has no cultural issue, right? He works with white women all the time, so that's not an issue. And he actually did projects for a Hindu community as well. So it's not even a religious issue. So there's people who are willing to put in work. So it's absolutely erroneous to say that it's your culture or the fact that you're not working hard enough. But I agree that in certain instances that might be the issue, but by and large that isn't. Because most people will take the job and they will adapt. I think if you don't have food, you will adapt.
Yes, to anything. One of the reports that came out a couple of years ago was called the Three Cities.
David Hutchinson.
And so what that report basically shows is that over the past 30, 40 years, there has been a decline in the middle class in Toronto. right? And it's showing very concretely that the high income people have more or less kind of stayed the same and fluctuated a little bit. The middle class has completely almost been extinct, and poverty is increasing consistently over the past 30 years. So this map kind of shows the top is the darkest color is the poverty, and so from the darkest one, so you can see how the darkest one increases by each year. And I can send this report out.
And
Yeah.
so are you going to talk about the report?
Yeah, we can talk about it. If you've read it, then you can.
No, I think the interesting thing about this report is the areas of concentration. The fact, that's why he says 3 cities. He says that Toronto is including the ghettoized, right? So Thorncliffe is an example of an area, and the downtown Toronto, and the experiences of people in both areas is dramatically different. It's a different city. Sorry, go ahead. I haven't read the report in 2 years, so I don't remember.
Thank you for the comments. But what this means is that this is not poverty. Again, this is another sort of indicator that poverty is not an individual issue, that it's people are not good enough. This is a trend that we're seeing constantly from for the past 30 years. There's something that's changing structurally that's making poverty the norm now. So there's a projection up to 2025 where there's like 65% of the city will be poor. Right? And what do these poor places look like? It's of course mostly new immigrants. It's of course people who have bigger families. It's of course people who are not able to afford their house, etc. And that is just getting worse and worse. Right? So in City 1, so City 1 is what he calls the city with the high income. City 2 is the middle class, middle income, and City 3 is the poorest income. And so in City 1, the percentage of foreign-born people declined from 35% to 28%, right? So in City 1, there's very little immigrants.
And City 1 is
The rich. Between 1971 and 2006. Whereas in City 3, which is the poor one, the number of immigrants increased dramatically over the 35-year period from 31% to 61% of the population. Right? So there is, not only is it economically segregated, it's very much racially segregated. Right? So City 1, which is the rich city, is going to be mostly white. City 3, which is the poor city, is mostly racialized. Right? Visible minorities again, City 1 is 82% white, whereas only 34% of City 3's population is white. Right? So economic apartheid. City 1 has very few Black, Chinese, or South Asian people who are disproportionately found in City 3. Only 11% of City 1 compared to 47% of City 3 are Black, Chinese, or South Asian. So what this means is that, again, the issue of solidarity, right? We are not in this alone. There are people who are racialized who are facing the same issues. How can the Pakistani community not only organize amongst itself, which is very important, but also reach out to other communities who are facing the same barriers, right? Of international credential evaluation, of affordable housing, of affordable childcare, of good jobs, etc. Right? So employment with the 3 cities. The City 3 is of course blue collar employment, which means mostly manufacturing jobs, service sector, or working in factories, etc. City 1 is white collar, of course, and it's just increased, right? Because City 1 has just become richer and richer, with those people and their families continuing to get better jobs, and City 3 has become poorer and poorer, with those families and their children getting worse jobs. Right? So what this means then, for me at least, as someone who's working in a racialized community in Toronto, is that this is incredibly important, just as much as poverty in Pakistan is or anywhere else is. Right? Because over here, the context is a white society, a white settler society that destroyed a pre-existing civilization in order to establish itself, in order to establish its gains and profit. And now the immigrant communities are the ones that are being kept at the bottom, being used for the labor that nobody else wants to do, being exploited to the maximum without gaining anything from it. Right? So there's studies to show that actually, while people often say that, of course everyone struggles. Immigrants are supposed to struggle for the first 10, 20 years. But statistics show that actually racialized immigrants are suffering for a lot longer, right? For the entire first generation, if not longer than that even. And so it's not actually until the third generation that racialized immigrants are making the same as the white
So
Canadians.
what you might be saying is, you know, people coming in and people who kind of saying they've been there, done that. It's silly for them to say that because given the conditions right now, it's just not the same.
Right. It's not the same. Because I mean, I talked to an MP whose family was Greek, and when we were telling him that, you know, we need more services for the immigrants in the community, he said, why? My parents did it without any services, and they came with $10 in their pocket, and now he's a millionaire, my dad. So why can't you guys do the same? Right? And so that is the narrative, to say that, well, you know, we did it. There's no sort of recognition of where
So
it's
even
from.
amongst the educated, there's a huge lack of understanding
Yeah.
of this.
Absolutely.
I agree. I would differ slightly with that conclusion because I think, you know, David Hutchinson is an example of a highly educated white male who has come up with this research. I think there's a lot of academics and highly educated people, and even in policy, who are discussing this. Like, I know that in policy school here, even at U of T, which is the most, you could say, you know, most establishment-oriented policy school around here, even the people who study there, they're very aware of this. I know a couple of people who have graduated, who have done research from the policy school. It's almost like, you know, if you want to study policy, then don't apply for immigrant stuff because everybody's researching it anyway. And once you research it, unless you're lying, it's impossible to get away from these facts, right? It's very clear, right? So there's people who are taking notice, and increasingly they're not in policy positions. They're not in policy making positions, right? They're not getting voted into power, for example, right? And, you know, people can. So there's educated people who know the issues and who have known about these issues for decades.
It's just that they're not at a point where they can make the decisions. But
Yeah, you know, it could be as simple as the fact that, you know, that person did not get elected, or it could be deeper that, you know, they got elected, but the civil service is not set up to provide services in
But
those
do they
ways.
get elected?
That's a very good question, and it's related to all of this. And you know, the electorate is very skewed towards a certain class.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, often the kinds of things that come up as solutions from many of these policy and urban studies people is to say things like, you know, we need revitalization of the neighborhood. So revitalization, what that means is what's happening in Regent Park, what's going to be happening in Alexandra Park, which is another community just near Chinatown. It was proposed for even Thorncliffe. And what that means is that, you know, you put up condos that are, you know, very expensive condos that will attract rich people, will often be rich white people. And what that will do is that the proximity of the rich white people, or rich people in general, will create opportunities for the rest of the people, and it will just pull up the whole neighborhood.
You see, that I feel that's a bit backwards, to be honest with you, because you know, I thought Singapore would be a good example. And although Singapore has like the tiniest amount of space, it's literally a dot on the map. And one of the ways that they managed to solve the problem of overpopulation, which could, you know, in some way be linked to poverty and whatnot, but in Singapore it's pretty good. People are happy simply because they work their way up rather than, you know, using up more land. If you've heard of HDB flats, basically, they're high-rise, they're built by the government, and that accommodate, and they go really tall, like they're very tall, and there's many of these HDB flats, and they're able to accommodate many people in hopefully an economic way as well. Just a thought.
Yes. So revitalization is often the idea that's given that, you know, all that's missing, and often that's an idea that's very much accepted by people within those communities, right? So in Thorncliffe, the main high school is Mark Garneau, and Mark Garneau has an elite program called TOPS, and that is a very advanced math and science program that you're supposed to get into through an application process and a test, right? But nobody from Thorncliffe or the surrounding area seems to be able to get in. All the kids who get into that program are from richer, whiter parts of the city. And so the question arises then, like, why do we have this program here that's not, you know, servicing the local community at all? is nobody from the local community good enough to get into that program?
Isn't TOPS based on sort of like you pass the test? And TOPS is like for high school, right? It's grade 9. So is that, well, if it's immigrant families that come here, their kids grow up here, I guess come here when they're young, they're schooled through the education system. Isn't it based on the, well, I guess you can see it as sort of they're not receiving support at home and stuff, but it's based on the education that they receive in school and they pass the test and then they go off. So, like, I'm confused as to why I guess it's not the same level of white.
So one of the things that we found out was that a lot of people in the community, so TOPS program wanted to move out of the community, right? They said that, oh, well, we don't want to share our school and our resources with these, the rest of this population because we don't identify with them. And the community actually forced them to stay because the community said that, no, we need TOPS because it has such good benefits for our children because these rich kids bring in their contacts and their networks and good, leadership roles that our kids will be able to get, and then our kids will get better as well. That never actually played out in that way, but the parents are sure that it will work out that way. So nobody from the community gets into TOPS program. Nobody seems to be able to, from the community seems to be able to pass that test.
Where is this?
In Marcano, at the school in
I know about this.
It's in Toronto.
Yeah, in Toronto. So nobody seems to be able to get in from the community, and so we're asking ourselves, okay, well there might be several reasons for that, right? It's well known that the schools around the area, from the preschool to the elementary school to the middle school, are overcrowded, and therefore the teachers are not giving enough attention to the students. So that means that the education level is low, right? So that could be one reason. The other reason could be, that their kids need extra help and there isn't that support system at home because either parents are working full jobs or they don't have the English skills or the education skills to be able to help their kids. Well, it turns out that neither of those was actually true because there are students in the middle school who were good enough to pass that test, who tried very hard and who could have passed that test. But the selection committee of TOPS is all of one person, and they told someone that we know that it has nothing to do with the test. It has to do with the profiles of the students.
Wow.
And profiles is often,
Which is basically racism.
right?
Wow.
But they don't say that it's racism, right? They'll say that, these are, Thorncliffe kids, all they do after school is go to the madrasa or they stay at home. The kids in TOPS, they go to their karate lessons, they go to their ballet classes, they go to their whatever else.
And guess what? Last year, guess who was the #1 principal? And it was the principal of Mark Arnold. And was it just on here or all of the country?
I don't know what
Just on, let's assume Ontario, but the #1 principal, across Ontario is Mark Arnold's principal.
Well,
Voted by the Toronto district board.
I'm curious. Does the principal has oversight over the TOPS?
We don't know who has oversight or what.
Okay.
Like the whole process is so
opaque.
very, very opaque. So we don't know. We can't even get a copy of the test. We don't know what exactly is in this profile except for what we've heard. And so this is kind of iconic of the way that a lot of these structures work, right? That immigrants tend to come up against these barriers, and all they're told is that you must not be good enough. You just can't pass the test, or you're just not you're not quite there.
Yeah.
But then when you look deeper, it's actually very structural, and so it's no coincidence that there is.
Well, was this sort of based on one person that said that suggested it?
So the person that we talked to was talking to the selection committee was one person. So the selection person was who told our contact that it has nothing to do with
When
it.
was it?
This was a couple months ago that we talked to that person. That it has nothing to do with it. And so, but in spite of this, people are still adamant that no, we just need to keep TOPS there because it's good for us in some way. So let me go back to some of the questions that were asked. I'm not sure what this question will be. Is there something else that you guys want to?
I'm wondering what you're
I
going to be
think I'll
talking
have to
about
leave
next.
it in 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I wanted to be conscious of that. That's
Thank
fine.
you. I'm not sure what this question means, so if maybe which you can clarify.
Yes.
How much importance do you give to income generation as opposed to value creation? Money isn't everything.
So our Twitter question was asked by Nizam, was that the conversation that was going on was that was surrounding the fact that there's a lot of unorganizedness and there's not a lot of unity within the Pakistani community, and sort of why that occurs. And then so we replied that there has to be more done, right? And so Nizam just basically asked, well, are we putting more emphasis on sort of working together, or is it just everyone just wants to get rich quick, right, within the community and the problems that occur around there?
So one of the things that we've noticed, and something that I personally have gotten frustrated with when working with these issues, is that whenever we talk about, okay, let's talk about collective issues, let's talk about structural issues.
Yeah.
Of course, that what people bring up is that we need jobs, right? And so people bring up that, can you get us a job?
But these jobs come from actual rainmaking opportunities, that's the thing. So like when you're looking at the private structure, you can't just give jobs unless there's actual opportunities to capitalize on. Do you see what I mean?
That you can't create jobs?
Well, I mean, when you create jobs because all of a sudden the company makes more profit, and the government is willing to provide more assistance to help the, let's say, the private companies to actually provide for them.
So if you look at the statistics of, like the profits made by the biggest companies in Canada, the profits have increased, right? The profits haven't declined. And the pay of CEOs has constantly increased for the past, decades. That's very consistent. That hasn't been jeopardized at all. What has changed is government policies, right? So the governments have, conservative governments and liberal governments as well.
There's no grants on this stuff. There's grants on a disability worker. There's grants on, but there's no grants on an immigrant.
So if I could just finish my point. What governments have done is that there used to be that, okay, well, we'll charge taxes on big corporations, and with those taxes we will create either social services, or we will create those grants which we can recycle back into job creation. What has happened is that this conservative ideology that if we cut taxes, the companies will stop creating jobs, and if we grant them, exempt them from taxes, they will automatically create jobs, right? And so this ideology has actually not played out ever in the US or Canada, but it's still stuck to that, yes, we need to give them tax cuts, billions of dollars worth of tax cuts, and therefore they will create jobs. The opposite has happened because, of course, we've seen, most recent example I think was in London, Ontario with a company called Caterpillar, and they had received billions of dollars worth of tax cuts, and so what it arbitrarily wanted to do was to cut the workers' pay in half, right, from $20 an hour to $10, and the workers, of course, went on strike. The company locked out the workers and told them that either you accept or, screw you. And eventually the workers were like, no, we're not going to accept. And so the company shut down and moved overseas with all the billions of dollars of tax cuts, right? So the government, the tax, we didn't receive anything. And so often it's the government's decision, very conservative decisions, to not tax corporations, because otherwise jobs can be created, right? If you take $1 million of taxes from a corporation, you can easily create a grant. Last election, I think it was last fall, one of the contentious election issues became a grant for immigrant employment, right? So it was like Canadian citizens who were recent Canadian citizens that the Liberal government said would give companies grants to hire them. And there was a huge, big anti-immigrant stir up in the media to say that, we're giving jobs to foreigners instead of local.
I think part of that question, our discussion is primarily on sort of the immigrant diaspora. Like that question for me, the first thing that came to mind was that that's sort of a question that a person that has been living in the country that sort of established themselves and has sort of a steady income would think about, right? If immigrants are here, they can't find jobs, their time is spent sort of earning the education that they lost, they're just trying to support their family. So I don't think they would sort of look at sort of getting as much money as they can versus the quality of where they get it from. I don't know if that's the right word. Whereas if someone is whatever third generation Pakistani, they then have the choice of sort of getting all the money they want, and don't necessarily have to struggle towards finding their basic needs.
and I think I, as someone who's working in the community, I've often, been very annoyed that why do people want to look for jobs when they're looking for more structural change issues. But the reality is that if someone cannot, their kids are starving, they're not going to want to come out to a meeting about structural change. So there has to be a balance for people who want to get involved in issues like this between serving the needs of food, of shelter, and doing structural change at the same time. Because otherwise that's not going to play out, and otherwise we as people who are supposed to be enlightened are going to start looking down on these people who are supposedly not enlightened.
And there has to be, sorry, just to add to that, I think there needs to be a process as well. Like, I mean, if the dynamic is that there is a group of people that is trying to address systemic issues, and there is a larger group of people that is trying to keep them in place. And
or more powerful group.
Yeah, or more powerful group of people, right? So if I'm trying to lobby for more services for immigrants, I'm fighting against a tide, and I'm generally going to be a non-profit. I don't earn a lot of money, and my funding is actually getting cut by government. But what I'm up against is lobbyists who are getting paid millions, who are getting paid like $1,000 an hour. So that structure is almost like, for some people it becomes insurmountable. So for example, again using my dad as an example, like he joined this group and he's still very dedicated to it. I don't think it's a good use of his time. That is trying to, he wants a certain policy change for immigrant doctors, for international medical trained graduates, and I know that his organization is what his organization is up against. I know what his resources are, and I say, it's going to take you 2-3 decades, and you don't have that kind of time, and so sometimes it's really, really difficult to engage in these processes. So that's why the community also needs to come together and stop thinking of, if he were thinking of only Pakistani doctors, then it would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
He's working with Indian and Arab doctors as well, so it's still somewhat feasible, right? But that's why the conversation of solidarity is so important.
Yeah, definitely.
Just going to ask, another question that was asked was that, so as there's sort of a lot of, as asked by SEHR review, was that there's a lot of, that there's a lot of sort of challenges within the Pakistani community as well, sort of like the Sindhi, like from Sindh, you're getting Punjab or Karachi versus Lahore and stuff, that those have to be overcome. So that was sort of a comment that was made on Twitter.
Right. I think that's often something that's brought up, that there is too many internal divisions. So right. So before we can point a finger at anyone else, we have to point a finger at ourselves. I think that is. For me, it's not a strong enough argument, because often what that means is that forget about structural issues. Let's just work on ourselves. But even that never plays out in a substantial way. There's no real efforts to unite over something that's common. So, I would give the example of the MD community in North Etobicoke and Maple. They're very well organized. Similarly, the Ismaili community is incredibly well organized. And they have their own welfare system, they have their own, subsidized housing, etc. And so, what is common to those communities that is not common to the broader Pakistani community? Of course, there is, a solid sense of religious identity. There's a solid sense of persecution that might go with it. There is a historical connection between the whole community that's largely actually non-existent in Pakistan. Right? And to be honest, Pakistan as a state, the identity is kind of shaky, right? Because we're Punjabi, we're Pathan, we're Sindhi, we're Mahajir, but to what extent is that the problem?
Yeah, I think we should sort of wrap up the discussion. There's 3 more questions that were asked. So the first one is there a disconnect between diaspora and people living in Pakistan? Does it hinder diaspora from truly understanding Pakistani problems?
I think that would probably go back to the class issue that we were talking about to begin with, right? That who is it in the diaspora who is coming here? If it is largely people, 1/7 of the Pakistani population who are the most privileged, then that itself is a barrier. So that would probably be a barrier while they were in Pakistan. It's probably going to continue to be a barrier while they're outside of Pakistan as well, because there was no sort of understanding of oppression within Pakistan.
Cool. And so one of the other questions was that as diaspora, do we make our own version of Pakistani problems and issues? When on the ground, we can be a whole different story.
In terms of that, we imagine a Pakistan in our minds, like
we assume sort of maybe through Western media that this is happening in Pakistan, whereas that this is happening when it can be a whole different story.
I think there's this question of the imaginary homeland is something that's discussed a lot in academia again, about identity issues. And so from what I understand is that identity issues, when they do come up in terms of having a very strong religious affiliation or having a very strong cultural affiliation, it's not an independent sort of, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It happens as a result of interactions within your new home. And so when you're facing discrimination, when you're facing a barrage of things that might seem very different from what they were back home, if you face a lot of barriers and there doesn't seem to be anything that's welcome, what you might turn to is things that you perceive would welcome you, right? So those might be things like religion, those might be things like culture, those might be things like a perceived notion of what Pakistan looks like, right? So, and I think if that sort of discussion of imagined homeland is completely divorced from the context and the struggle of immigrants, then it's lacking. If it's if it's in conversation, to say to what extent does struggle within the immigrant context contribute to a distorted Pakistani identity, I think that would be a useful conversation. I don't know what to say as to conclude that this is what it is, but I think the conversation needs to be both ways.
Cool. And the last question is that as diaspora, do the challenges we face in our country prevent us from performing our duties as Pakistani citizens?
So the challenges we face in Canada.
Yeah. So the example she gave was that cab driver working day and night to make ends meet won't have time to help fix issues in Pakistan or money to donate. And so I would just, if I could answer, it's just sort of that it comes down to sort of the basic needs, right? We're talking about two different types of people. If you don't have your basic necessities, food, shelter, their education to that as well, you don't have time to sort of you don't have time to help others, right? You can help yourself, we can help others.
Yeah, and often I think the thing is, and this is true for a lot of people who are in Pakistan and here who might be doing well off, is that they'll dismiss struggle over here, right? They will say that there's no such thing as real poverty in Toronto. There's no such thing as real poverty in Canada. The real poverty exists in Pakistan, right? And the reality is that poverty is relative, right? If you're not able to afford food, if you're not able to securely afford your rent, you are poor. Your life is full of stress, and that stress does take over everything. It takes over your mind, it takes over your body, it affects you.
I think the difference probably there is probably things like health to do.
And actually, as Uruj pointed out, the social determinants of health, if you're poor anywhere, your health is going to suffer, right? Poor people in Toronto are more likely to be diabetic or more likely to have hypertension than like rich people in Toronto. So I think maybe the sort of the way that it plays out in Pakistan might be different because of the forces, but relatively there's poverty as well. So I think there's perception in Pakistan that money grows on trees here, and so everyone must be rich just because you've landed, and so those perceptions need to be questioned as well.
I was going to say any sort of, we should probably wrap up, we're running way over time, but any sort of last comments from you as a speaker, and then I will go around like we always do. If I could just say one thing that they learned from the session.
I think the final comments I would make is that it is important for us as a community in Toronto to be mindful of other communities in Toronto who are suffering from the same problems, and that we will find that we learn a lot from other communities who've been here longer, maybe like the Black community, like the Indigenous Canadian community, not only in terms of how they have faced the struggles, but also how they've resisted and how they've built their movements to to fight against this. But thank you for listening.
Well,
I think I learned a lot about how the system of needs and refugees and and immigrant services is interlinked. I wasn't as aware of the connection, and I certainly wasn't, like, the revitalization thing is new for me, because I'm interested in community economic development and programs that, that could be called revitalization, although I'm not in fact a fan of condos, but I think, trying to bring communities back to life is a good idea. But
I can send you some articles that have some.
Yeah, I actually just looked up. There have been a couple of articles on, Alexandra Park and Regent Park recently, but these are in the Toronto Star, so I'd like to read something more substantive. So I'm going to look up. I think the organization that I should look at are Metcalf Foundation and Wellesley Institute. So and Matry, of course, which is like the best organization when it comes to, not the best, but in terms of information.
I'm actually working with them right now, so I have my.
Yeah. No, I would say in terms of like an organization that is focused on immigrants and providing information and resources, they're far beyond most. So I would look at what research they've provided. So that's really interesting for me, because I think that conversation about jobs is really important, right? If you give someone a job, or affordable housing, the other thing. If you have an address, that makes a huge difference to your life.
So either you meet their basic needs, or you give them a job that will meet their basic
exactly.
needs.
Yeah.
The one thing I've learned is that I can definitely add more weight to the action plan of helping people in the community. I think it comes from understanding their adversities, but somehow relating it to your adversities as well, to let them know that you've also overcome adversities and whatnot, and that can hopefully bridge the gap between different sections of society based on income and that sort of thing. So how can you relate to them and build rapport with them with the adversities that you overcome, failures and things like that, and let them know that, look, we're not different from you. We were doing things, and we have heard stories as well, and we know of these situations that you're going through, but they didn't help you. We'd love to help you and whatnot. So how can we relate to that? And I think that should be part of the next action plan.
Something that I learned, first off, thank you, Salih, for coming in. That was a great, awesome discussion. This is completely different from what we've sort of covered in the past, which is straight connected to sort of on the ground Pakistan. This is like a community that for a long time, people have suggested that we should be looking at the Pakistani Diaspora. So it's great that you came in and talked to us about that today. What I learned, I think, was two things: the 29 skilled worker jobs that Canada wants people to come in, the find people, and the fact that it's actually flawed, that it's sort of a lie. I think that's not right. I'll just use those words, not others. You can see on Twitter the words that I used. I think that's interesting, because that, I think, sets up sort of the long list of challenges and barriers that the immigrant population will face. And a lot of it is relatable as well, which I thought was great. People can connect to the challenges of sort of reinventing yourself in a new country. And the most shocking thing was just the TOPS program, because I know Mark Arnaud, and I was going to possibly go to TOPS as well, and I could have possibly have made it, but apparently now I can't. I think that was really interesting, and that should be sort of looked at more, because I know that, especially in the area, Mark Arnaud was sort of seen as a really good public school because of that program. The fact that individuals in the community can't go to that's pretty interesting. Again, that was really good. It was a great discussion.
Thank you so much.
I guess that sort of ends our discussion on the Pakistani Diaspora. Again, thank you to our speaker for coming in and individuals for joining our session. We will be letting you know when our next is. I think we have it planned. So just watch out on our Facebook page, Facebook/PDF Pakistan, and on Twitter, you can follow us at PDF Pakistan as well. And if you ever want to see the comments that are made about the discussion, just follow the hashtag PDF Diaspora. And thank you to everyone online who sent us questions as well. That was really awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for participating, and those who didn't come, you missed out.
Yeah. Thank you.